Hello and welcome back. I hope the forehead and hair went well. Our next step is to work through the center part of the face. We're going to be working on our eyes. It's a pretty intimidating step, probably the most intimidating thing to add value to. In the first part of this video, I'm just going to talk through how to shade a kind of stereotypical generalized eye. It helps you to understand what you need to look for as you start adding value to your actual eye. In the second part of the video, you'll see me draw the eye, an eye and a half on my drawing. So the left eye to the right eye. And I stopped, not quite done with the right eye, because I wanted to take a look at it from a distance, step back, kind of read the scene, and see if there's any modifications that I need to make before I finalize the value on both eyes. It's really important when you start adding value to your drawing that every once in a while you set it up on a surface so it's facing straight out at you, and you step back a good 6 to 12 feet and just kind of look at what it looks like from a distance. You'll notice different things when you do that step, so make sure you step back every once in a while. Take your time on the eyes, really focus on those subtle variations and shadows. It makes a big, big difference. Have fun.
And if you'd feel more comfortable starting off with a little sample eye in your sketchbook, it's not a bad idea to try it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my graphite lines. I'm going to lighten those up. I also want to identify an area where there's a highlight. So if we look at Zoe's photo here, you can see there's a little highlight here on her photo. This was a lamp that was circular. I'm going to change this into more of a rectangular shape so it looks a little more natural. I'm going to grab my HB pencil to start, and I'm going to make sure that it's nice and sharp. Just give myself kind of a little bit of what that highlight's going to look like, and I'm going to outline that highlight there. The next thing that I'm going to do is start to build in some value on the eyeball itself. A lot of times my students think to themselves correctly that the white of our eye is, in fact, white, which is not incorrect, but it is also a ball. And therefore there is some value that indicates that shape. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to start adding some value underneath that upper lid where there's a shadow, and look at your images that you're drawing from. You'll notice that there's some value in the eye. There's value in the inner corner of that eye as well. And right now, because the rest of this drawing is still white, this value looks a little out of place. But have some faith. It's going to look good in a little bit. I'm also going to add a little value into this tear duct. I'm going to use a little bit of a scumble. I think it works well in the tear duct area. Keep in mind the tear duct is going to be darker than the white of the eye, so don't be afraid to add some good values in there. And eventually, the white of the eye underneath this upper lid is going to get quite dark. I'll come back in with some darker values here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in my pupil, and I'm going to go straight to a 4B for that. I want to make sure that that shape of the pupil is right. A couple things to keep in mind with the pupil is you don't want to make the pupil too small, even if you've got a bright light shining in your eye and therefore your pupil is small in your photograph that you're working from. If you make the pupil too small, your portrait will be, it'll appear that the subject of your portrait is a little bit more frightened or uncomfortable. Our pupils dilate, our pupils get smaller when we're encountering something that makes us uncomfortable, that makes us scared. And psychologically, if we look at a piece and those pupils are small, that's the message that we get. So if they're too small, increase the size. If you make them too big, however, you're going to look like your portrait is undergoing a drug treatment or just went to an eye doctor, and you don't want to have that kind of reaction as well. Notice here I went around the highlight on the eye. Now I'm going to grab my 2B pencil. Our iris is a muscle that we can see, and like most of our muscles, it's got a striated kind of cellular structure, and you can see that in the iris itself. And if you look at somebody that has lighter eyes, you can often see those little kind of stripes and variations in their eyes. Now, Darker eyed folks, you might not notice as much, but it's still there. So you want to add that kind of texture into your piece. And I do that by going around. Usually eyes are darker around the edges. So I'll get my edges nice and dark. And then I just build in kind of these triangular striations in towards the pupil. You want them to radiate out from the pupil. And if I leave it like this, it looks super creepy. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to keep building in more of these. Now I'm going to come in with my HB and I'm just going to kind of blend some marks in from that edge towards the pupil so that we fill those areas out. My blue-eyed friends, you don't have white eyes, please make sure that you add value. If you look at your photo, if it's in black and white, you'll notice that even if your eyes are blue and lighter in general, there's still quite a bit of value in that iris. You want some good value there. I'm also going to use this HB to really firm up that outside edge of my iris. Make sure your iris is a good, nice circular shape before you start this step. So you see how that kind of gives the impression of those striations in the eye. And you can keep working that in, and if you've got darker eyes, you might need to layer in a little bit more value yet. At this point, I'll take a few minutes to just round off and finish up the details on this iris, harden up the edges of those reflections in that space, and make sure that everything is pretty round as I can get it by eye. And then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start to blend out the shadows that fall underneath my eyelid. This step always freaks out my students because it's the white of their eye and they always feel like it looks so wrong. And if I just have the value of the eyeball and the iris, it does look kind of wrong. I need to get the values of the skin around that eye and it's going to look more right. So now I'm going to start working on adding value into the fold of my eyelid. It's darkest where the fold meets the eyelid above it. So I'm going to kind of start at that darkest point and pull up and build value in there. And I'm going to get darker on the inside and the outside corner of this eyelid fold because the eyelid folds around the eyeball underneath here. And so this center part of the eyeball is closer to you. It bulges outwards. So there's usually more of a shadow on the inside and outside corner. Now, of course, it's really important to take a look at your specific image and the eye that you're drawing and make sure that your value matches that eye and the value structures you see there, because lighting, different light sources and angles will affect all of this in different ways. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to start adding value to the eyelid down beneath the fold. In here, we're going to have more shadows in this section of the eye. It'll lighten up towards the center and then get darker again as it pulls out away from the eyeball. A little darker where it folds down away from you. Eventually we'll add eyelashes in here too, which will affect the look of the values in this section, but we're going to wait to do that after we've added value everywhere else and built up the value behind where the eyelashes go. Because that way when we add them in, we're not going to mess them up by adding value again over the top of them. This is the inside corner of my eye. My nose would be running through here. And this inside corner is the darkest spot of the eyelid area of the skin around the eye. So I would work those values in and around. But again, you know, look at your image, look at your shadow structures, decide where you need those values the most. This part of the eye, this lower lid, you often see the thickness of that lower lid. And there's usually a little bit of light that hits that thickness, so there'll be a little light spot there. And then the shadow of the lower lid kind of builds underneath it. So you've got just a little bit of nice light underneath that eye that hits where that eyelid comes out. And then you see the shadows underneath. Your lower lid also builds around your eye. So it's darker in through this section underneath, inside corner, and this outside corner. A lot of times my students like to leave this bright white underneath their eyes because they don't want it to look like they have bags under their eyes. Well, guess what, my friends? We all have bags under our eyes, some more than others genetically, but that's how an eyelid functions. It's the roundness of the eyeball underneath the skin there. So you really do want to make sure that you pull in some of those details to give that roundness in there. And if you see a little bit of more of a fold or things like that, add it in, make it realistic. At this point, I'm going to shift to a 2B and sharpen it, and then work in some of my darkest values around the eye and really push those contrasts. And then back to the HB to kind of blend that out once I see the contrast. If this was my drawing, at this point I would continue and draw the whole rest of the face, and then I would come back for this very last step, which is adding eyelashes and line quality. So I have my students do all the value on their drawing, and then the very last step that we do when we're done with everything, including the background, is we'll come back into the face with a really sharp pencil, and we decide where we need to darken up some lines and bring out our edges. So on the eye, I usually darken up that inside corner just a little bit, add the indication of that tear duct in there. I will darken up that edge where the lower eyelid and the eye meet each other, lightening it up as I pull towards the center. I will also get a nice dark line on that eyelid fold. I might come in and add just a little bit more of an edge where that eye comes down and turns into the skin. And then I'm going to do eyelashes. So eyelashes on the outside are a little bit longer. You want to make sure you have a nice sharp pencil. The eyelashes are thicker, closest to the eye. You want to make sure that you change the direction as you pull these little lines outward. And as they get towards the center of the eye, you kind of stop. You don't want to put too many in that center section or it looks like you have a caterpillar. So there's just little eyelashes that taper out. There's eyelashes that go all the way to the center of the eyelid, but they stick towards you more so you don't really see it. So instead you just have like a darker line there. It kind of indicates the eyelashes. Then they start to taper in, come at it from different angles. I always push hard in the beginning and then I lighten up as I pull out. On the lower lid, eyelashes are a lot lighter, so I'm going to switch to my HB. And they start at that eyelash or the lid line there. And again, darker and longer towards the outside. Make sure they don't all flow exactly the same way. You want to have some variation there. As it gets towards the middle, you see less. They're much lighter with a lot more space in between. On this outside edge here in that dark shadow, I'm going to use a little bit of a darker pencil, my 2B, to draw in those last lashes. Don't overdo it on the lashes. It is easy, and it's been done many times by students in the past. You would not be the first if you were to do that. But you really want to have those lashes be one of the very last things that you add in your entire drawing, not just one of the last things you add to the eye. It's tempting to add them early on, but if I do that and then I discover, oh shoot, I need to get darker up here, and I start drawing on top of it, I'll lose that line of the eyelash there. And then if I go to add more eyelashes, it starts to look like caterpillar eyes. So make sure that you're totally done with pretty much everything before you put those eyelashes in, okay, my friends? If you would like to practice drawing just a generic eye like this before you draw the eye on your portrait, go for it. Or if you want to practice drawing your eye in a sketchbook before you draw it in the portrait, using the light and value structures that you see in your piece, that would be a great practice to do as well. But whatever you do, study that eye well in your photograph before you draw it in your actual piece. Have some fun, see what you can do, and best of luck to you, my friends. Now you've learned how to do the basic shading on an eye and what to look for. And it's time to start working on your eyes on your portrait. I'm going to make this its own step because eyes are pretty complicated and it's really important to get them right. So I want you to really take your time and work hard on those little subtle details. The first thing I'm going to do before I start drawing is take a look at my photograph and try to notice important aspects about it. I want you to look at both eyes and discover which one is in highlight and which one is in shadow. And I want you to notice as you do that, that the white of the eye on the eye in the highlight has a lot more light values, and the white of the eye in shadow is much darker. Now that might seem obvious, however, it's something sometimes my students don't draw in. They try to make both eyes the same value. Additionally, the iris on the eye in shadow is darker as well. So when you're drawing that iris, it's going to get pretty dark. When you draw the iris in the light, you can keep those values on the lighter side. Before you start drawing, you also want to look at how the lighting and the value works around each eye. And I'm looking at my lighter drawing or photograph of Zoe here so I can kind of see the structures of the inside of that left eye, which are in shadow. But if I look at my darker valued drawing, I can start to see more of the values around her right eye as well. So, you know, you might want to change the contrast on your photo if you're looking at it on your phone, just to discover a few of those different subtleties. Once you've kind of looked at that, so you know what to look for once you start drawing, the other thing you're going to want to double check is that you just feel very confident about the shapes of your eyes. If you're feeling like those eye shapes might still be a little off, I would go in and make some modification to those. So I'm going to take a pause, go in, make sure I've got the eyes exactly how I want them, and if not, I'll make some changes to them before I start adding value. I've gone in, I've made some modifications to the eyes, and before I get started adding value in this area, I just want to make sure that my grid through this section has been erased. So I'll go with my vinyl eraser and get rid of that grid, including in the hair to the left and right of her face, because I'll be continuing to build that hair down through this section. And then I'm going to go in with my kneaded eraser to clean it, just stretch it out back and forth a little bit. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to lighten up the value of the lines of her eyes. At this point, I'm ready to grab my HB, make sure that it's nice and sharp, and start building in the value. And again, I'm going to work from left to right. So I'm going to build in her hair, and then when I get to her face, I'm going to come back in and we'll start working on the values around her eye first, and then into her eye, over the bridge of the nose, and then into the right eye. I've built in most of the value directly to the left of her eye. Eventually this whole side of her hair is going to get darker, but I'm going to build the value down the face first, and then I'll come in and I'll push my darker values and finishing touches at that point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my freshly sharpened HB and start building in the values around her eye.
At this point, you're building in your form shadows. Build it in lightly, build it in slowly, pay very careful attention to how those shadows move through space. Eventually, you're going to start getting darker in the core areas of those shadows, and you're seeing me do this now with a 2B pencil. It's going to look too dark to begin with because it's built up against white paper, so keep that in mind. You notice the same thing happens when you draw that pupil in to start. Pay attention to your iris and the darkest spots of your iris and the lightest as you're starting to build those values. Think about the subtle little details. Really pay attention closely to what you're seeing around the eye. The other thing you need to not be afraid of is the dark shadows and the dark side of your face. When you're drawing your first eye, if it's on the dark side, it's going to look like you have a black eye. It's going to look way too dark. But just remember, match the values that you see on your page. Here you can see me starting to build the values over through the right side of her eye as it meets the nose, building those values in. Every once in a while I'll go up to the forehead and start to darken those values as well. And what you'll notice again is as you start to build values into your drawing, the spaces that you've already drawn will start to look too light. I've got her left eye done, and now I'm going to start working on her right eye. This one's much lighter, and I'm moving through really slowly so I don't accidentally get too dark. I stop before I'm finished on this eye because I want to come at it with a fresh eye tomorrow and just make sure that it's in the right spot and right angles before I start to work the darkest values in over there. So you get to come back on the nose video and you can see her finished right eye. Take your time, take it easy,